Star Wars 7 by 7 episode 2896. All right, we're halfway through the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Yes, episode 4 drops today. This is not going to be about that because we're recording before it drops and releasing before it drops. But for today, we are going to do a mid-season review, talk about some of the hot topics that have popped up in the first 3 episodes and what we have to look forward to for the rest of the series. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7 by 7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So the reviews are generally so good for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that there's allegedly a season 2 in development. This is all rumor and speculation at this point. Nothing has been confirmed. Certainly Ewan McGregor has said that, with a good enough story, he is definitely open to doing it again, so that's obviously fantastic to hear. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We've got a series in progress right now, and so as we've been doing with the episode breakdowns themselves, we've got this bucketed into 7 highlights and things to consider as we look back at the first 3 episodes of the series and look forward to the remaining 3 episodes of the series. The first point I want to start with is just to establish something that, I knew and I, imagine, a lot of people know, but I just feel like it's kind of crucial to our understanding of where things are. And that's that at this point in the timeline, Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader does not know that any of Padme's babies survived the events of Revenge of the Sith. He just knew that she was pregnant. I don't think he knew that it was twins in the first place. And based on, later events that happen where he finds out that Luke is his son, he doesn't know that there was a second child. So I don't think he ever knew that there were twins to begin with until we got to Return of the Jedi. But at this point in the story, he believes that Padme died without giving birth and that the child, that there would have only been one child that he knew about or suspected, also died as well. And that sort of rolls into the second point, which is that Vader just can't kill Obi-Wan. It's not enough for him. We saw that displayed in episode 3 of the series, which we're referring to as not the face, because of course Obi-Wan's face can't be damaged because we see his face well and truly intact when we get to A New Hope. But it's not enough for Vader to just kill Obi-Wan outright. He needs him to suffer, and his focus on that is going to prevent him from getting a clean victory over Obi-Wan. Yes, I guess you could say that he was victorious in that particular fight in episode 3, but he didn't do what he really wanted to do, which is essentially make Obi-Wan suffer the maximum amount as possible before killing him. And the reason why he needs him to suffer is something that we're not necessarily talking completely about, because yes, we talk about Padme, we talk about his rage, we talk about his grief, and we talk about him blaming Obi-Wan for some of this stuff, but it's also the unborn child that Anakin lost as part of this whole situation in Revenge of the Sith. So, there's even more grief and sadness and rage that Vader is dealing with, that Anakin is dealing with, that we haven't even really talked about. It's so deep with him. And so he is so overwhelmed and consumed by it that he's just not going to be able to deal with Obi-Wan in a straightforward fashion. That brings us to our third point, which has to do with little Leia. And obviously she is going to survive this, but the question sort of becomes, how is Vader going to deal with this situation? Because that he has to be aware that Obi-Wan was brought out of hiding to rescue young Leia for Bail Organa. And so how is Vader going to deal with Bail Organa? Because now he knows that Bail is somehow in contact with the Jedi, or with a Jedi at least, who survived Order 66. And at some point he has to kind of question Leia's whole existence. Where did she come from and how did she come to be adopted by Breha and Bail right around the time that he actually flipped over to the dark side? But can there even be any consequences for Breha and Bail under the circumstances? Because ultimately what would come out is that the Inquisitors kidnapped their adopted daughter, and that's certainly the kind of publicity that the Empire definitely wouldn't want. And of course, Breha and Bail are going to survive this series as well. So Basically, is this just going to put them on like double secret probation? Because for sure, Vader is not going to pick up on Leia being force sensitive at all. And that kind of goes back to the conversation that Obi-Wan and Owen have about whether Luke is quote unquote showing. So you could actually wonder the same thing about Leia, whether she is quote unquote showing as well. And you would have to assume the answer is no. Otherwise, this would be a whole new level of interest for Vader and the Inquisitors, considering that Tala, played by Indira Varma, has said that Force-sensitive children are being disappeared, so they can't pick that up on Leia because she can't be disappeared. Unless, and this rolls us to point 4, which is that if they do sense that Leia is at all force sensitive, then she might be disappeared to Nur. And Nur is the planet where the Inquisitorius has their base. We've seen it already in the series, and of course it shows up in Jedi Fallen Order. And we have to go there during this series because we've seen that there are other scenes taking place on Nur that haven't been shown in the series so far, but have shown up in trailers and commercials and whatnot. So she's going to Nur. We know that Reva is basically going to grab her as, a result of the events of episode 3, right? It makes sense that she's going to be taken to Nur. It's just a question of whether they're going to identify her as force sensitive as part of this whole process. But she's definitely going there, which means the action is going to Nur for the rest of the series as well. All right, so the 5th thing I want to flag has to do with the Grand Inquisitor. And I think we've touched a little bit on this, but there's a lot of chatter about this online. And so I just figured, let's, just summarize what the deal is with the Grand Inquisitor and, put it to bed, basically. So in episode 2, which we're calling Make Me Float, Reva stabs the Grand Inquisitor and goes after Obi-Wan. We don't necessarily know the fate of the Grand Inquisitor, and it's one of those things where if you didn't see him die, then you can't necessarily assume he's dead. So there are basically 3 situations that we could be facing with this particular Grand Inquisitor. Number 1, we know that the phrase Grand Inquisitor is just a title, and Vader / Anakin made that clear in episode 3 when he told Reva that if she's able to deliver Obi-Wan, then she will become the Grand Inquisitor. So it's a title that can be conveyed to whoever. So that's point 1. Point 2 is that, going back to the fact that we didn't see the Grand Inquisitor dead, we didn't hear him declared dead. So for all we know, he is actually still alive after being stabbed by Reva. Granted, that similar kind of stabbing killed Qui-Gon Jinn, but we don't know what Powin pronunciation, what Powin physiology is like. So maybe that stab wound isn't necessarily fatal. And heaven knows characters have survived far worse. Darth Maul survived getting sliced in half, for pity's sake, and still came back later on. So it is entirely possible that this particular Grand Inquisitor is still alive. And regardless of whether he is, there are more Powins out in the universe than just this one. And so the Powin Grand Inquisitor that we meet in Star Wars Rebels may or may not be this same Powin. It's hard to say for sure. So I think there's still a bit yet to be revealed about that whole situation. The 6th thing I want to flag has to do with Obi-Wan and his line to young Leia when she asks him if he is her real father, and he says that he wishes he could say yes. Now, I have to say, when I first heard that line, I thought, is he suggesting that he wished he had had a kid with Padme? And that just seemed really weird to me. And there's been a lot of discourse on social about this one as well. Apparently there is an Obi-Dala shipping situation that happens out there, but there's not necessarily really any evidence within storytelling canon to support it. It's just something that some fans are into as an idea, and hey, more power to them. But there are, of course, different ways to read that particular response. And I think the situation I've arrived at is that I wish that the dialogue line had been a little bit different, because maybe it would have made things a little bit clearer. But one of the ways you could look at that is that, he's saying, I wish you were not the child of somebody who turned into a Dark Lord of the Sith, because that, of course, has its own complications. And another way you could look at it is that he's just complimenting her as a young person in general, saying that she's remarkable enough of a being that he's met, that if he were to be a father, that he would be proud to have her as a daughter, and that's, you know, a beautiful sentiment to be sure. But the way that I think I want to read this is that he's having a moment where he's considering the path not taken with the Duchess Satine, and that if he had left the Jedi Order and had instead continued a life with her, that, you know, maybe all the stuff with the Mandalorians and Maul wouldn't have happened, or he would have been totally away with her somewhere where that wouldn't have been an issue, or he, you know, somehow basically would have been able to live a life with Satine and have children. And he's looking at Leia and thinking, my gosh, like, you know, I could have had an entirely different life, and I could have had a wonderful kid like this who's, you know, smart and brave and stubborn and all of these, you know, things that make kids just so remarkable. So yeah, I'm picking that line up as a line of regret about the path not taken from Obi-Wan. And the final thing I'll highlight for our episode today is the end game of the show, where these last 3 episodes are going. So we know for sure that Leia is going to get back to Breha and Bail, and that Breha and Bail will survive the series as well. Obi-Wan's going to survive the series too, but the big question is whether Vader / Anakin is going to believe that Obi-Wan has survived. It seems that the best way to ensure the safety of Leia and Luke going forward would be for Obi-Wan's death to be, you know, almost assumed for all intents and purposes. Like, for example, if he falls into the waters of Nur and nobody is able to find his body, so there's no way to confirm whether he's alive or dead, but basically it seems like it would be impossible for him to have survived. That would take the edge off of Vader and make him not be continuing to scour the galaxy, and also not have the Inquisitors be on his tail looking for him either. Of course, if they do want to do a season 2 of Obi-Wan, then that also creates a bit of a problem, because then suddenly he pops up again, and if he pops up again, somebody's going to be paying attention to him unless he's like out in wild space or something like that. But again, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's just see what happens when Tala, and I'm betting this is what's going to happen, so I'll be proven right or wrong very quickly, whether Tala is going to be the one to help smuggle Obi-Wan onto Nur to be able to rescue Leia. So there you go. That is the mid-season review of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.